the reality for their mental health, I think, will be quite bad. So then, obviously, the good news is that we now have the extra 1 year post-study work right visa. So now you can do, for a 3-year undergraduate degree, you still only get 2-year post-study work right visa in the big cities. But for a master's, by coursework, you now get a 3-year post-study work right visa in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, and the big capital cities. But you get a 4-year post-study work right visa if you study in Canberra, Adelaide, Perth, Gold Coast, and then 5-year post-study work right visa if you do remote. So if you study in a rural location, and there's not many of those in Victoria, but so Ballarat, yeah. So 5 years. That means you have to put up with Ballarat weather for 5 years. I think these are all pull factors to encourage students to come here, and we hope that, particularly uncapped work rights, I don't want that to last very long. We're going to review that next month, but hopefully we'll go back to a more sensible situation. I mean, obviously, we are very reliant on students from our own region, and there's now a big push to try and get more students from Latin America, from other parts of the world, but for some reason, our Home Affairs Department don't want many students from Africa. So UK has many thousand students from African countries, but our Immigration and Home Affairs Department don't give many visas to African countries, but for Latin America, they do. But one of the problems we have is, for example, if you're a Colombian student from Colombia, and Melbourne has many Colombian students normally, their student visas are being processed in Vietnam because the Australian Embassy in Colombia doesn't have enough local staff who are trained to process student visa applications. So we're getting too many rejection letters for Colombian students, just one example, because the Australian Embassy in Vietnam, on the other side of the world, is now looking after the student visa applications. Crazy. But Home Affairs Department said because of the pandemic, they've had to move to a global student visa processing policy. For example, Hong Kong has been closed down because of the pandemic in Hong Kong. So they've given the visa processing of Hong Kong students to another embassy somewhere else in the world. And what that means is that the local embassy staff in Vietnam, they don't understand cultural issues for Colombian students. And this is a big problem we're trying to argue with Home Affairs Department at the moment. And of course, with India, our second biggest market, which is now our biggest market, there are at the moment many worries about fraudulent documents. And I know that this is an issue which our Immigration Home Affairs Department can use as an excuse sometimes to go slow on student visas. So then we look at the other point there about Chinese students. China is our #1 market normally. 35% of our university students, higher education students, come from China before the pandemic. But now we're finding many Chinese students can't leave China because of COVID-0 policy, not enough direct flights. Many can't get passports. It's not just Australia issue. It's for many Chinese students, they can't go to Canada, UK, USA because of these Chinese government policies. So many Chinese students are still happy to study online. And for Group of 8 universities, they are still getting good enrolments of Chinese students who will be studying online because they want the degree or the master's from a Group of 8 top-ranked world university, like University of Sydney or ANU, University of Melbourne. So we want to bring the Chinese students back here because it's really important for diversity on campus to have a good mixture of students. Next slide. Thank you. No, yes, good. Okay, so I've got some data slides for you. The first one really is about to show you how bad the situation is with ELICOS and with schools. So you'll see that we're getting mostly higher education students coming back. I think many of those will be coming back to finish their courses, not necessarily new students. For vocational education, we think we'll get a lot more of vocational diploma students, because now there's a 2-year post-study work right visa for diploma students, which wasn't there before. For schools, we need to improve. And I think one of the problems with schools is under 18-year-old homestay. Many Australian families, because of COVID, have stopped providing homestay for under 18-year-olds. And then independent ELICOS is going really badly. So, and that's the pipeline. Although most students who come to do English will do it as part of a pathway program with English language and diploma and higher education. Next slide. So on 28th of February, this was the primary student visa holders, and it shows you that most are in New South Wales and Victoria, I mentioned. In Northern Territory, they know all of their international students by first name because they have not so many. That was a joke. But you'll see there that states like Western Australia are paying a very high price for their closed border policy compared to New South Wales and Victoria. And you'll see the worry is there are many still outside of Australia. So they've got the student visa, but they haven't come back. And that's a big concern for us. So then the next slide. And these are ABS, Australian Bureau of Statistics figures. So, you'll see there, I've got that there because it shows in the last 5 years with the commencements in the whole year. And so you'll see there that we don't know yet what the commencements are because the visa data at the moment doesn't distinguish between commencing and returning. So we'll know that soon, hopefully. Next slide. And this one shows the primary visa grants. And you'll see there at the moment where the yellow dot is sort of in the middle of where we would like to be. Okay. And one thing that, so does anyone have any questions about the visa data? No? Okay. One thing that Australia is good at in international education is governance. And by that, I mean we're the only country in the world that has got a National Council for International Education, which has 7 federal ministers. It's Minister for Trade, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister for Immigration, Minister for Education, Science, all the ministers that cover international education. And there are 7 ministers and 11 non-ministerial members. And I'm the convener of that council. So about every 5 or 6 weeks, I have a meeting of the 11 non-ministerial members. And once a year, we meet at Parliament House in Canberra with the 7 ministers. So it was quite interesting at the meeting we had in November last year in Canberra, where you could tell the mood of the government and the 7 ministers was much more about let's get the student visas happening. So that was a good message that we got. But also at that meeting, we approved the new national strategy for international education in Australia for the next 10 years, 2021 to 2030. And that national strategy has got the heading of connected, creative, and caring, because we understand that we need to improve our reputation when it comes to caring for students and student welfare. So what's come out of that strategy from last November is 4 things. One is discussion paper on student diversity. So because, now this is only for public universities. So because the government argues that they give taxpayer money to public universities, they are forcing the public universities to have diversity indexes, diversity action plans, where the university will have to prove that it's not just getting all its students from one country or 2 countries. We all know that business courses at public universities can be 80% Chinese students. And there's a lot of negative feedback from Australian domestic students about too many students from one country, not just China, but from India or from Nepal in the lecture theatre. So But for private providers like Oxford, the government has said they won't have to worry about that diversity index. They can have all Chinese students, all Indian students, if that's what they want. But that's been a really important paper, which I had to write a submission on to the government about that. And in my submission, I said, well, government, you're saying that you want us to get more students from lots of other countries, but your own Home Affairs Immigration Department says no to student visas from lots of countries, like Africa. So you have to get your own house in order if you're going to then require public universities to be forced to diversify. The second one is one that some of you will know about. We're doing another review of the ESOS Act. Who can tell me what it's there, Education Services for Overseas Students, ESOS. Again, we're the only study destination country in the world that has protection law legislation for international students. So I myself sit on the Tuition Protection Board, and you all love to pay money for tuition protection. And I'm pleased to say that during COVID, we've had very few education providers who've gone bankrupt or collapsed. So we haven't had to take much money from the tuition protection levy. So the levy's been kept very low, happily, because in COVID, we haven't had too many closures. I think because many of the private providers got JobKeeper and got other support. So that review is going to be looking at some very interesting areas. So it's going to look again at English language entry standards. It's going to look at more encouragement for T&E, transnational education, so having more offshore campuses. It's also going to be looking at how we can embed online learning in the future. Now, I think it's interesting that the government want to push for more offshore online learning, but what we have to understand is the national regulators, TESCA and ASQA, will probably be doing an audit soon of how well offshore online has gone. And there are mixed views about that. So we have to get submissions into that ESOS review by the end of April. The third point is micro-credentials. Now, micro-credentials are going to be a very big new thing. The government's provided $8 million for industry associations and education providers to partner to come up with up to 70 new, mostly higher education micro-credentials. Can anybody tell me what a micro-credential is? No? Any ideas? Okay, so a micro-credential is about a 3 to 6 month mini course that might be, for example, on cybersecurity, or it might be on IT, a particular specialist area of IT. Sorry, not for micro-credential, no. But in business it would be, in engineering, accounting, and in IT. And so the idea of micro-credentials is to get more international students, probably offshore, to do a short course that will give them a taste of then coming to Australia to do a longer course, but it will give them academic credit that they might be able to put from the micro-credential into their degree or their master's when they come here, to shorten the time they have to spend studying. And it will be a separate credential. So it will be, they'll get a certificate to say that they have qualified in the cybersecurity micro-credential, for example. So this is a big push by government. So there's $8 million for 70 new micro-credential courses in higher education. There's another $1.8 million for micro-credentials in vet diploma education. So just keep an eye out for this, because you'll probably have a lot of education providers will knock on your door and say, we've got a CPA or Australian Computer Society endorsed micro-credential. Okay. The next one is the International Education Innovation Fund, and that's $10 million for 6 big projects. And we'll go to the next slide. Yeah. No. Yeah, that one. Yeah. So this one here is about $2 million, the second one, to look at how they can deliver better in offshore campuses in those areas of the world. I've mentioned the vocational micro-credentials. This one here is to develop critical skill courses with partner countries, particularly in Latin America, in agriculture, in mining in Latin America and agriculture in India. And that's to try and get more specialist skills taught in those countries, that the students can come to Australia to do extra study in agriculture and mining, to try and meet Australia's skills shortage. So that's an important one. And research another 120 PhD student placements in industry needs. And this one here is a $300,000 project for a better student guide for student welfare and student support, which IEA, we've put a tender in for that one with ASANA. So next slide. Thank you. All right, we have something in Australia called a federal election coming up. And I've called this crystal ball gazing, looking into the ball to see what might happen. So if we have a Labor government, will they throw out the new national strategy? Will they get rid of the governing council? And will they change the department structures? So 7 years ago, international education was not in the federal education department. It was in the science, technology, jobs department, and it got lost there. So the best spot, the best department for international education is in the education department, and we're pushing for that. It is a change of government. Will Labor Party, if they win government, will they get rid of uncapped work rights? I don't think they will. I think because the economy needs more workers, they'll keep them for some time. And I even spoke to the president of the Australian Council of Trade Unions, Sally McManus. I met her at Melbourne Airport and said, look, what does the trade union movement think? Because they're close to the Labor government or to Labor Party. What do they think about uncapped work rights? And she said, Phil, we're going to keep uncapped work rights because it's desperately needed for the economy. So you've actually got Liberal Party and Labor Party and the trade union movement supporting uncapped work rights at the moment. But I think common sense is you'll have to come back to some sort of cap. Chinese government, if there is a change for a Labor government, I think the Chinese government will become, how do you say, they'll play nice, I think, for a while, because I think they'll see a change of government as an opportunity to restart some better alliance. And so I think that will help Chinese students come to Australia if there is a change of government there, because there'll be more likely to be a more friendly attitude from China to Australia. For a short time, I think Labor will know that most Australians are worried about that relationship. But I think there'll be an opportunity for a better relationship and more university friendly. So I think normally a Liberal government, a coalition government, is friendly to private providers. A Labor government is often more friendly to public universities. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And I think, for example, a Labor government might stop the universities from having to do diversity action plans. And the only other problem I think we'd have with a Labor government is that they'll delay a lot of the reform that's happening now with ESOS and so on, because they'll want to have a look themselves beforehand. And then New Columbo plan, that's for public universities only. Next slide, it's a final slide. So the big push now in Australia, after our Prime Minister told students to go home 2 years ago, is now to support international student mental health, better accommodation, better friendship groups with Australian students, and really trying to make sure that they have a more comfortable, happy life while they're studying in Australia. So my association, IEA, we paid for a Student Voices survey about a year ago, which surveyed, or 18 months ago, which surveyed 5,000 domestic and international students. We did this in partnership with Education New Zealand. So we thought it'd be good to compare what's happening in New Zealand to Australia. New Zealand government provided JobKeeper for international students who had a job in New Zealand before the pandemic. So not surprisingly, when we published our first report that looked at international students' attitudes to New Zealand government, to Australian government, more international students were happier in New Zealand than in Australia. And then the second report we did from that 5,000 student survey was a report on domestic Australian students' attitudes to international students here in Australia and New Zealand during the pandemic. Happily, if there's been anything good to come out of the COVID pandemic, it's been that a lot more domestic students showed in the survey that they now understand better the challenges, the problems, the life barriers that international students have in Australia and New Zealand. And many Australian domestic students reported how they had acted as volunteers in food banks. They provided a spare room in their home for international students. So there was lots of good reactions, good warm feeling, because I think before the pandemic, a lot of Australian students just thought the international students were taking their uni places and were not contributing. So this was a good response. My association also works closely with the Council for International Students. So again, we're the only country in the world that has an elected National Council of International Students, and the president of that council sits on the National Council with me. And that council, we actually pay for a secretariat for them now. So peak bodies like IEA, we pay for a secretariat in Canberra to support the Council of International Students. And mental health support's becoming a really big issue that we're getting more education providers to focus on. And even our national regulator, TESCA, has said, the higher education regulator, has said that they're going to be looking in the next year at what each education provider, public university, private colleges, what they're doing to give priority to student mental health issue. And then finally, so we'll go back to that slide if we can. Next one, yeah, this one here. What IEA has done is we've paid for a public relations campaign. So last week in Sydney, I was at a film studio where they do the Aldi supermarket ads. I was there. And what we've done is we've done a campaign on helping Australia thrive. So some people in this room would say, we've been wanting a campaign like this for 20 years. And the audience for our campaign is Australian families. We want Australian families to understand better the benefits that international students and international education brings to our country. So we've paid for a public relations company in Sydney. They've come up with the theme of international students help Australia thrive. And at the film studio last week in Chippendale, as a client, I had to watch and agree on, we had a student from a female student from Thailand who's doing an MBA in Melbourne. She works part-time as a barista, but she also gets paid part-time to teach hip-hop dancing. So up in Sydney, they brought in an Australian female student who's studying dance. We flew the Thai student from Melbourne up to Sydney, and they were on stage being filmed and photographed with the Thai girl teaching the Australian girl how to do hip-hop dancing. Why do we do that one? Because we want more young Australians to understand that international students have got lots of talent and can teach different things. We should have done Bollywood dancing too. And then the second talent we had was an Indonesian boy who during COVID got 12 other Indonesian students to go to Western New South Wales, to Orange in New South Wales, and pick fruit. And so we had him filmed with a farmer with a great big box of cherries. They weren't real cherries, they were plastic cherries. Showing that, sorry? Yeah. They look like real cherries. And it was showing that international students have been helping farmers. So we had the farmer actor looking like an old farmer, an old cranky farmer, on a ladder, looking happy at the cherries that the Indonesian student had picked. And then the third talent we had was a really good one. It was a Filipino student from Melbourne who has graduated in nursing, aged care. He's just come back from nursing in Thursday Island, which is an Australian Indigenous community in northern Queensland. He'd been there for 2 weeks. And so he was in his nursing uniform, standing next to an old lady, Australian lady, doing her, what are those exercises? She had the band, the big plastic band under her foot to make her more like Pilates, yeah? So that was to show that international nursing aged care workers are helping older Australians. So this afternoon at 4 o'clock, I'm having to approve the animation. We're going to put animation around the photos of the Thai girl, the Filipino nursing graduate, and the Indonesian student. Thank you. Good. So that's what we'll be doing, approving this afternoon. So I'm trying to get $1 million. So IEA, we spent our reserves. We spent about $250,000 on this campaign, and we're going to get $1 million from public unis, from private colleges, from accommodation providers like Scape and Union Lodge, to fund this campaign in social media and in newspapers. And importantly, when the federal election is called, if we get some crazy politicians like Pauline Hanson, Jackie Lambie, Clive Palmer, if they decide to make international education a big anti-push, we will have the material to roll out straight away to defend what we do, under helping Australia thrive. So wish us luck with that. Okay, so that's the presentation from me. Happy to take any questions.
Wonderful. That's some amazing insights there from Mr. Phil Honeywood. So first of all, we're going to throw to some questions, be that in-house or online. Maybe I'll start from our some of the members here in Melbourne at the campus. Maybe say who you are, who you're with. I'll leave that there. That's very sensitive.
Okay. Thank you, Phil. My name is Tiffany. I'm actually the industry friend of Audley Food and maybe future business partner. So I come from an RTO called Origin Institute. I come into this seminar just want to have a couple of questions in regard to international education. So I attend this one. So in your presentation, you're talking about Review ESOS Act. And which I'm really interested because, as you know, right now, like Audley Food is such an amazing college, as well as us, we are doing other kind of like course. But one thing I think in our international education is we actually have very strong compliance as a college to obey the ESOS Act and national
standards.
Standard. But the thing is, we find it's quite difficult for to educate our international agency and consultant to understand. So sometimes it meets a scenario because the school, like Audley Food or us, we're trying to recruit really good quality students, but it's quite hard because, with a different provider have a different philosophy and also the understanding about the ESOS Act and national standard, everything, it's really hard. So I just wondering in regard to, with ESOS Act review, and is there any support for education agency and especially this individual consultant, like senior consultant, to understand how to work with schools, quality schools like us, instead of, only just, to be very frank, it's just like some course or some provider, and they probably just based on the price. And it's really hard for the provider and agency as well. So we're trying to understand how to do as a provider to working with agency based on this scenario.
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, and it's really a question that's almost impossible to answer, because 80% of international students who come to Australia come through an agent. And as you know, we have offshore agents and onshore agents.
Yeah.
For onshore education agents, it's easier for government to regulate.
Yeah.
For offshore agents, no Australian government can pass laws that would control bad behaviour by offshore agents, because offshore agents come under the control of their own government.
Okay.
But most education agents, in my opinion, are really genuine about looking after students.
Yeah.
I guess, unfortunately, during the pandemic, what has happened has been that in fighting to get the few students that were still here, some education agents were expecting much higher commission from private providers, even from public unis. And that bad behaviour becomes like cannibalism, where people start, fighting over every 1% commission and fighting amongst themselves. So there is a mood in the government, in the ESOS discussion paper, about greater regulation of education agents. The Department of Education would actually like every education provider to be forced to publish the commission they pay to every education agent. I don't think that will happen, because there's the official commission, and then sometimes under the table there's the unofficial commission for counsellors, the agents, whatever, to get bonuses and so on. So, but definitely there is a mood in the government to have education agents forced to be more regulated, so that bad behaviour is stopped. Because I myself have heard of some cases where some onshore agents were demanding 40% commission.
More than that, I think.
More than that, okay. Now, if you are demanding 40% commission, then how can a private education provider, when they pay for rent on building, staff, IT, everything else, how can they give quality education to students and still make a profit? Almost impossible. So American universities almost cap their commission for agents about 10%. We've now got also in Australia a lot of they call agent aggregators. So I know of two companies, Adventus and another company, Educo Accelerate, who are now getting a whole lot of agents to sign up to their platform, and they give the agent 10% commission, and they keep another 7% themselves, but they do all the GTE, genuine temporary entrance, they do the admissions for the Australian education providers. Now, it'll be interesting to see how those aggregators go compared to some of you who are agents who are very close to your students and would argue that you can do a better job as well. So it's a very difficult one to answer. I talked about a lot of issues there for you.
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you so much for your
good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. Is that? Do we have any more questions from the floor?
But ECA, I mean, in Victoria, we're very lucky to have the Education Agent
Education
Consultants Association, ECA, and Ben has been now running that, or on the executive of that, for how many years now?
5 years.
5 years. More,
More than 5, yeah. 2011.
Yeah. So in Victoria, we have ECA, which is a group of quality education agents who meet regularly to talk about how to make things better. There's also in Sydney now a group that are trying to be national called ESAA, I think, which is
ISE.
yeah, International
International Students Education Association.
Association.
Yeah.
And they have employed somebody and they're doing workshops and seminars. So there's, amongst education agents themselves, there is now a big push to try and talk to one another so that we stop this cannibal, what I call cannibal behaviour. Yeah. Okay.
Do we have any other questions? I think I actually have one question just from one of my contacts. You mentioned that Homestay had taken a hit from COVID. Is that something that, are you seeing an increase, or have people just...
absolutely. Because I mean, even the street that I used to live in East Melbourne, we had two ladies who were widows, you know, their husbands had died, and both of them would rent out 1 or 2 spare bedrooms in their house to international students. Now, because of COVID, these old ladies just didn't want to have a young person living in their house and, you know, maybe catching COVID off the young person. So this is just one example, 2 examples where for under 18-year-olds, not just under 18-year-olds, quite a lot of over 18-year-old girls at universities and private providers also like Homestay because they feel more family, like in a family. But no, there's been a lot of Homestay families drop out. And because it's not a regulated area, it's very difficult to force anybody to take anybody into their home. So in some cities like Darwin, it's almost impossible to get any Homestay families, at least here in Melbourne. There's a culture of Homestay families, often from the same migrant background. So a lot of Chinese Australian families or Indian Australian families will, and it's good money because they get paid and they don't have to pay tax. They have no more than 3 international students living in their home, they don't have to pay tax. So it's a nice way of making additional income. Yeah, so long as they do it well, Daniel, then you know it's very helpful for international students' mental health as well. They come home each day and they're coming to a nice family who will ask them how their day was and so on, compared to living in independent accommodation. But there's not much we can do about it other than maybe advertise for new families and families to think about taking an international student in.
Sure, thank you. And I guess it's incentivized by I guess it's what they're getting paid, the tax-free, that's their incentive. Are there any other incentives for families?
No, I mean, other than making friends with foreign families.
Yeah.
I myself was a Rotary exchange student to Tokyo, Japan, and I lived with 4 Japanese families in Tokyo when I was 17, because Rotary Club had that exchange program. So I understand the good things and the bad things about living with families from other cultures. And for example, one of the families I lived with in Japan, their own son got very jealous because I was a foreign boy that was spoiled, and his mum and dad were too nice to me, and he got jealous because he thought, well, who is this guy taking over my mum and dad? Yeah, so you've got to be careful. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I just had a query with, you mentioned about tuition protection scheme.
Yes.
I wanted to know, like, all the universities' refund policies which are outlined, like, which students would have signed, which most of them they sign without reading most of the time, but are they all approved by this ESOS?
So every private provider,
even university
and public universities, they all pay into the tuition protection board.
Yeah, but each and every refund policy is approved by any particular organization?
Yes, so in order to get your CRICOS registration as a private provider or as a public provider, you must show that you've got a proper refund policy.
Because I have come across one particular refund policy, which I was quite puzzled about, that they said if you pay tuition fees from overseas, like any other country, then that money is not refunded. But when students are overseas, first semester fees will definitely come from other country, you know.
Well, that's
So-
that's illegal. So
That is illegal,
yeah.
do you
So
think?
whichever provider you're
Yeah.
talking about there, what they're doing is illegal
Mm.
because,
But then it's in their official policy.
well, it must be in very, very small writing.
Yeah.
Because every education provider is supposed to put the tuition fees they get from overseas into a special trust account,
Mm,
and they're not allowed to move
mm.
the money from the trust account into their normal cash flow account
Yeah.
with the bank until the student arrives
Mm,
and starts class.
mm,
So that's the rule.
mm,
Now, some of them break the rule with their bank manager,
mm,
and sometimes I hear that they will phone the bank manager and say, oh, look,
mm,
I need more cash flow, so can you
mm.
transfer from my trust fund into my operating? But that's also,
But
No.
even if it like student arrives, you know, usually they have like first 4 week of withdrawal, you get 20% refund, then following week 50% refund and things like
Yeah.
that. So we have seen those gradual refund policies, but this one was very odd one out. So I just wanted to raise with
well, if
you.
you want to let me know the name of the provider, I will follow up for you.
Okay, I will personally.
Secret. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, at the back.
One sec.
So we've got a microphone coming to you.
It's probably, I'm not too sure if it's relevant to the question that this lady asked, but I just want to ask you regarding to rebates and things like that in student visas.
Yeah.
So if the students, you know, if they come here on a student visa and then they get granted a business type of visa, in that situation, do they still get the funding, the rebates that they would after census date, or how does that work
They
now?
only get the rebate on a student visa if they can show they've paid for a student visa
Mhm.
and they've arrived back in Australia. They can't get it overseas. They have to show they've arrived in Australia. But I think the period they could apply is almost finished now, I think. Yeah. So it was like an 8-week period in which they could apply. But the Home Affairs Department told me they've had about 74,000 applications. Yeah, I mean,
That's a lot.
about $650 now. So yeah, but it can't be for another visa. It's got to just be for a student visa.
Thank you, Danny. Just one sec.
Department of Home Affairs is holding on all the visas because they don't have to give the refund once the
No,
student
no.
arrives.
I can't know.
It's, yeah, I know it's a conspiracy,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
given like, you know.
And
how
once the
it's
students
going.
applied, they've met the 8-week period. So,
Yeah.
Thank you. We have one here from SW Consulting.
Yeah.
So I'll read this one. So SW Consulting, thank you for your question. It says, as you mentioned, the duration for postgraduate temporary visa 485 and the condition on working full-time for international students will be reviewed next month. What is your expectation and what is your forecast about the change if it occurs?
I think there's a confusion there. So for post-study work rights, there's no review, okay? So post-study work rights, it's gone from 2 years after you finish a master's to 3 years. And then 4 years if you're studying in a regional city like Adelaide, Canberra, Perth are called regional cities, Gold Coast, and 5 years if you're studying in Ballarat, right? So that's post-study work, that's 485 post-study work right visas. And they brought that change in and there's no decision to review that in the future.
Okay.
Separate from that, any international student who comes to Australia now and who studies full-time is allowed to work uncapped in the economy while they're studying, okay? So it used to be 20 hours a week or officially 40 hours a fortnight.
Yeah.
And now they can work 140 hours a week while studying full-time, which, you know, most of us think it's crazy because if they're here to study, study should be number one.
Yeah.
And if they are allowed to work in the economy too many hours, yes, they'll earn lots of money, but they may not pass their course. And
Yeah.
it will be the education provider who will be punished by the regulator for not failing students who don't do well. So yeah, they're the two separate issues. Post-study work right visas, separate. No decision to review those yet. From the decision on uncapped work hours, which will be reviewed in April, but we think that it won't be properly changed until July because there will be the federal election that will interrupt any review.
Right, thank you. That was actually my next question of the review in April, and I was going to ask, is that actually set? But you did answer that. So they're going to push that back.
In April, what will happen next month will be, next week, will be that the government will go into caretaker mode, which means the public servants, I won't say put their feet up, but the public servants don't do much because the tradition or the procedure is that public servants can't make many decisions while there's an election on. It might make corruption in democracy or whatever. So they don't do any policy work like reviews during the election period, and then they wait for a new government to be formed. So it won't be till June, July.
Wonderful, thank you. Do we have any other questions for the floor? Oh, yep, I'm going to. Very sensitive.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, Phil. My name is Cash.
Good name, Cash.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a short name. My full name is Prakash.
Okay.
I'm from Nepal.
Yep.
I have worked in this industry like 14 years ago when I was in Nepal. In between, I started doing different jobs in Australia. And now I want to come back in this field. I've registered an organization and I have started. So I just wanted to know, like Nepal is on level 3. So it's very hard for them to get visas. So like what are the things that we can look into so the students get the visa easily, or in a, you know, like what the Department of Home Affairs look into?
Yeah, so Home Affairs Department, every 6 months, they look at the risk rating for countries and the risk rating for education providers. And officially, they don't announce the risk rating for countries. It's meant to be secret.
Okay.
You all know about it before anybody else does, but it's meant to be secret because they don't want the overseas country government to get upset about being rated badly. But it really comes down to the amount of fraudulent documents. And in Nepal, India, other countries, we've had lots of problems in previous times about students, you know, saying they'd finished year 12 when they haven't, and so on. So it's fraudulent documents. It's also finances. Sometimes there's a bit of funny business with where the student's getting the money from. You know, my fourth cousin is going to give me the money when the fourth cousin may not be alive. And so all of that plays into Home Affairs Department decision every 6 months. To say, is Nepal high risk or has it become less risky? And one of the issues in Nepal was that there were many banks, so many banks, and many of them were giving money to students and student loans, and there were lots of banks that were going bankrupt, and that also caused problems for Nepal risk rating. So it's
and how can we increase the chances? Let's say like paying the fee, like normally if we pay for a semester, it's really fine. But if we pay for a year, then there is a more chance of getting the visa, or how does it work?
Not really.
Because then it shows that, okay, the student is genuine, he wants to come for a study.
Yeah.
So
no, I wouldn't be encouraging students to pay an education provider a year in advance if they don't have to, because what if the education provider falls over? I mean, the student will still be protected because we do have the tuition protection service, but there'll be a lot of pain and suffering. So no, that doesn't really help. So long as the student is willing to meet the visa conditions of the minimum payment and so on, and also provided the student is going to enroll in a quality education provider like this one, Oxford Institute, then their chance of getting student visa are higher than if they are trying to enroll with a private provider that's not so quality. I mean, we've all heard Home Affairs Immigration Department have what they call the blacklist of some education providers that they don't like.
Yeah.
I've never seen the blacklist, but I think some of us in the room think it's probably there somewhere. Yeah, so risk rating is based every 6 months, not just on the country, but on each education provider. So,
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Another one at the back.
Just one more here.
So this question is related to a lot of provider and agents as well. It's about regional visa.
Yep.
So, you know, like right now, the federal elections coming soon.
Yep.
We're really interested to know what's the government going to support for region, what's the direction there? Is that provider, the students, what's your opinion and prediction about if Labour Party coming or either the current existing party stay, what's the policies in regard to encourage students to go to a regional area to get the training, or the Labour Party maybe revise this policy, maybe, okay, this is okay, we just stay, you know, in Melbourne or in Sydney, like, what's your
Look,
opinion?
I think what I want to happen compared to what might happen, I want more state governments to be given double, triple the number of state-sponsored migration places than what they currently do. Because state economies are different around Australia, as we discovered with Western Australia. And so at the moment, each state and territory government can allocate some thousands of migration places themselves for skills that they want in their state economy. But what we want them to do is get more of those places so they can offer. And one thing I didn't say in my presentation, which I really think is important, is that the mood in Australia at the moment, by both Labor and Liberal, is for big Australia.
Okay.
By that, I mean a much bigger migration program.
Okay.
Why? Number one reason, we don't have enough Australians to do the work that we need done. Number two is we now have a $1 trillion debt because we've thrown so much money out in JobKeeper and other welfare. So whichever party's in government knows that if you have a big migration policy and go for big Australia, then any economist will tell you that a big migration policy helps the economy because migrants pay taxes when they come here. They need housing, so that helps the building industry. And it's what's called the multiplier effect in our economy from having new people arrive. So, yeah, I think another message I want to give that's optimistic is that both political parties are looking to have a much bigger migration policy as we come out of the pandemic. And that is normally very good for international students if they're clever enough to pick which skills, for example, aged care.
Yeah.
Any student that can do aged care, they will get a job. The only problem we have is that the Australian Nursing Association, ANMAC, have made IELTS 7 entry level for the lower level nurse. Now, you know, that's crazy. You can graduate in Australia with IELTS 6.5 to be an engineer, but to start a lower level nursing course, not a graduate nursing, a lower level, you have to have IELTS 7 just to start. So what's happened is it's meant that a lot of Indian, Vietnamese, Sri Lankan, Thai, Korean, Japanese young people who were going to do nursing can't get IELTS 7 level. So where do you think all the nursing students are coming from? The Philippines, because they speak English, you know, as a native language, and we're getting lots of Filipino students coming in doing nursing and aged care. So it's about, if you're an education provider, it's about looking at the skills in demand and matching those to which countries you're going to recruit students from. If you're an agent, of course, it might mean opening up an office in Manila, but it means also looking at where the students will fit with English language levels and so on, according to the courses you're going to promote.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
When you're talking about the English level,
sorry,
and
about
we're
the,
talking about the English level that
Uh-huh.
we required to do a course here.
yeah,
Now, with the education department, with the VCE this year, they're introducing the new literacy and numeracy that's going to be revamped in the GET test.
Yeah.
How do you think that's going to, how successful do you think that be with a lot of our students who are coming back to Australia now and who's been spending the last 2 years online with very little practice of English? You know, they probably listen a lot, but in terms of practicing, talking, how do you think that is going to affect them? Especially we've got a lot of students coming back here for year 12 at the moment. And this is going to be introduced this year. And the GET test is going to be in September. How do you think that's going to affect our year 12 students?
I think
And how is
you-
that going to
yeah.
affect their pathway into university?
Yeah. I think what you'll have to do is get a lot of English conversation clubs happening. I think
Yeah.
outside of school hours, I think if you can get a buddy system going in with your Australian students
Yeah.
to try and get and give them a reward, the Australian students, some sort of incentive, chocolates always work, to have them do conversation English, that's the best thing to do.
Right.
In New South Wales, it's been more difficult because for some years in New South Wales, the international student has to do a separate English language test from the year 12 one as well. So yeah, there's no easy answer to that. I think obviously English language entry levels are really important.
Yeah.
We've had some really bad media about, I won't name the university, but really bad media in Four Corners program, ABC, about one university that was too easygoing on direct entry without checking English language standards, and unfortunately that that meant that they made it bad for everybody else.
Yeah. So would that pose as an advantages for our students who might stay overseas and complete their year 11 and decided, you know, they come here to complete their year 12? So would that be a disadvantage for them? And in terms of like, I'm not in marketing or anything like that, but I think when a student asks you questions, you need to have an answer for them. So for a student who want to come here and complete year 12, you know, who's got credits for year 11 in their own country, but they come here and they have to have these tests, this GET test at the end of the year, where who knows, you know, a lot of Asian students, I'm probably stereotyping here, but their maths is not an issue, but the English is so important. So how do we go in terms of helping these students, and will the department going to know what we can do to help these students who come in late into the year?
Look, I've got no easy answer because it is what it is. You have to have a proper English language standard to meet entry levels for universities and for post-secondary. And there's no easy answer to that because we cannot afford in our reputation, particularly with Australian community, to be seen to be dumbing down or perception of dumbing down English language entry standard. It's crucial. You know, it's what we have to deal with. So, I mean, there's been a big growth anyway in offshore international high schools. On my board until recently, I had the principal of Haileybury, Derek Scott, who now has about 5 partner international high schools in China, one in Vietnam, and they teach the Victorian Certificate of Education in those schools, and they don't seem to have too much of a problem when the student comes to Australia anyway. So those students are doing year 11, year 12 totally in China or totally in Vietnam, and are getting into Monash University and other universities. So yeah, I mean, if Haileybury can do it and somehow have enough English language taught offshore in China and Vietnam, then
It's not an issue.
we have to find ways.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I know it's not easy. Any other
Thank you.
questions?
Do we have any more questions, and even for our friends online? And if not, I believe we might have, is that all good? So I believe our Dean, Michael might be coming through. Is Michael over there? Oh, we're gonna bring Rong back on the screen.
All right.
So,
I'll have to go shortly here. I've got 4 o'clock.
okay,
on
okay,
my
sure.
Film studio.
Okay, no worries. In that case, is Rong ready? Okay. Because we'll start to wrap it up now, folks, but I guess we could,
Very good question. Thank you.
yeah. So,
Hi, Ron.
hi, Rong, you might have to unmute. We can't hear you, Rong.
Okay, now I'm mute. I couldn't even control my mute button, so that's the problem. Thank you, Phil, for your time. That was a very insightful information, and I'm sure we all sponged up your knowledge and your experience very quickly. I've just got one question, which is $1 million question. Phil, I know you have to go, which is,
That's okay.
what do you expect the election result may be?
I think
It's a long topic, but you can
No.
refuse to talk about another time.
no, I think there'll be a change of government. I think there'll be a Labor government. I think the worst thing that would happen would be if it was a minority Labor government in power with the Green Party or independents, because history shows in Australia that nothing much gets done when you have those minority governments, and bad policy then happens. So I think there will be a change of government. If there's going to be a change of government, then I'd rather a Labor majority than, a minority situation, so the decisions can actually happen. And look, I think wrong whether it's going to be more than a one-term Labor government will be interesting, because I think the Liberal Party will be very strong on economic management, and often what happens with Labor governments is they spend a lot of money. And I think the trouble is with the $1 trillion debt now, a lot of Australians will start to get more and more worried each year about taxes going up to pay the debt. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see about at this stage. If I was going to have a bet, then I would say it would be a change of government.
Wonderful.
Interesting times ahead, Phil. It's a big topic. Will be distracting us for the next 2 or 3 months or so.
Yeah.
So thank you, Phil, for your time. We look forward to the next year's workshop, and I see you around, and have a great afternoon, everyone.
Okay, well done,
Wonderful.
Oxford. Thank you.
And we'll bring Michael up here to present our academic dean. So
I'm going to.
a gift Yanni has to go. So if we could all offer a big round of applause for Mr. Honeywood. And thank you everyone around the world for attending. Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. All the best. Thank you, everybody. And for everyone, all our friends online, that was any questions, do definitely write in, and we can